The mop clattered to the floor the moment he heard her laughing, because in 3 years of cleaning that hospital corridor, Daniel Reyes had never once heard a patient in the pediatric wing laugh like that, not even on the good days, and something about the sound stopped his heart cold in his chest. He turned the corner with his cart still rolling behind him, and there she was, a girl no older than 8, strapped into a wheelchair with metal braces on both legs, spinning slow circles in the empty visitors' lounge while an old radio on the windowsill played a scratchy waltz. Her arms moved instead of her legs, sweeping through the air like she was still dancing even though her body had long stopped cooperating with her, and nobody was watching her, nobody was clapping, nobody even seemed to know she was there. Daniel stood frozen with his mop bucket dripping soapy water onto the tile, and something inside his chest that had been closed for a long, long time creaked open like a door nobody had oiled in years. If you believe kindness like this still exists in the world, if you believe broken people can still find their way back to each other, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are real, and subscribe to the channel because stories like this one are only just getting started. Daniel Reyes had not always pushed a mop for a living. For years earlier he had been a mechanical engineer with a corner desk and a nameplate, married to a woman named Carla who used to leave sticky notes shaped like hearts on his lunch bag, and a daughter named Mia who used to fall asleep on his chest listening to his heartbeat instead of a lullaby. Then the company folded overnight in a wave of layoffs nobody saw coming, and 6 months later Carla's car slid off a rain-slicked overpass on her way home from a job interview she had taken to help make ends meet, and Daniel woke up one Tuesday morning a widower and a single father with a mortgage he couldn't pay and a 4-year-old who still asked where mommy went. He sold the house before the bank could take it. He took the only job that would hire a man with gaps in his resume and grief still raw in his eyes, and he told himself, mopping floors at St. Vincent's Children's Hospital at 11 o'clock at night while Mia slept at his sister's apartment 2 bus rides away, that this was temporary, that this was just until things got better. 3 years had passed since he first told himself that lie. The girl in the wheelchair was named Willow, though Daniel didn't know that yet, and she had been at St. Vincent's for 6 weeks undergoing a treatment regimen so aggressive that even the nurses spoke about it in hushed voices when they thought children couldn't hear. Her condition had taken the strength from her legs one muscle group at a time over the course of 2 years, and the doctors used words like progressive and irreversible, words that fell on her mother like stones no amount of money could soften. Because Willow's mother was not an ordinary mother waiting in an ordinary hospital corridor. Eleanor Voss had built a logistics empire from a single delivery truck and a stubborn refusal to fail, and her name appeared on business magazine covers with words like visionary and self-made stamped beside her photograph, and none of it, not $1 of the billions she had built, could buy her daughter's legs back. That night Eleanor had stepped out to take a call from her chief financial officer about a shareholder crisis 3 time zones away, and when she came back down the hallway toward her daughter's room, phone still pressed to her ear, she heard the same radio waltz Daniel had heard, and she stopped in the shadow of the doorway before Willow or the janitor could see her. What Eleanor saw made her lower the phone from her ear without even ending the call. Daniel Reyes had set his mop against the wall, wiped his hands on his gray uniform pants, and crouched down in front of Willow's wheelchair with the easy, unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere else in the world he needed to be. He asked her, in a voice too soft for Eleanor to fully catch, whether a lady as fine a dancer as herself might allow a clumsy old janitor the honor of a dance, and Willow, who had not smiled in front of a stranger in weeks according to the nurse's charts, laughed so hard she nearly tipped her wheelchair sideways. Daniel took her small hands in his rough, calloused ones, careful of the 4-line tape to the back of one wrist, and he began to sway with her, turning her wheelchair in slow gentle circles across the linoleum in time with the music, humming along under his breath because he didn't know the words, dipping her slightly at the end of each phrase the way he once dipped his own wife at their wedding a lifetime ago. He wasn't performing. He wasn't aware anyone of consequence was watching. He was simply a father who missed his daughter's laughter doing the only thing he knew how to do with the ache inside him, which was to hand it to somebody else in the form of kindness. Eleanor Voss stood in that doorway and felt something break loose in her chest that 3 years of the best specialists money could hire had never managed to touch. She had missed birthdays for board meetings. She had missed a school play because a supplier deal was collapsing in Singapore. She had told herself for years that providing was the same thing as being present, and watching a man in a stained uniform who likely made in a month what she made in an hour give her daughter something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like pure uncomplicated joy. She understood with a clarity that frightened her exactly how much she had gotten wrong. She didn't interrupt them. She stood there until the song ended and Willow flung her arms around Daniel's neck and whispered thank you against his shoulder, and only then did Eleanor step back out of sight, wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, and walk quickly toward the elevator before either of them could see a billionaire crying in a hospital hallway. She came back the next night, and the night after that, always finding some reason to linger near the pediatric wing during the hour when Daniel's shift brought him past Willow's room, and she watched him read to her daughter from a battered paperback he kept in his cart, watched him fix the wobbly wheel on her chair with a screwdriver from his own toolbox without being asked, watched him bring in a small handheld radio of his own after the lounge one mysteriously stopped working, though Eleanor suspected mysteriously had nothing to do with it. She learned his name from a nurse. She learned, from a gentle bit of asking around that she was careful never to let feel like an investigation, about the wife lost on a rainy overpass, about the daughter waiting across town with an aunt, about the engineering job he never spoke of to anyone at the hospital because pride, she came to understand, was sometimes the only thing left a man could still carry with dignity. On the 9th night, Eleanor finally stepped into the light of the doorway instead of standing outside it, and she asked Daniel, her voice unsteady in a way it hadn't been in a boardroom in 15 years, whether he would consider a different kind of position, one where he could bring his own daughter to work with him instead of leaving her across town, one that used the engineering mind she had learned he'd nearly let go to waste. Daniel, mop in hand, braced for pity and found none in her eyes, only the plain, searching gratitude of a mother whose child had learned to laugh again. He said yes before she even finished describing the role, not because of the salary she named, though it was more than he'd made in his old corner desk life, but because for the first time in 3 years someone had looked at him and seen not a man who mopped floors but a man who had never once, in the worst season of his life, stopped choosing kindness. 6 months later, Daniel stood in a different hallway, this one lined with the offices of Voss Logistics rather than hospital rooms, watching through a glass wall as Willow, out of her wheelchair now and balanced on forearm crutches after months of a new therapy program Eleanor had personally funded and pushed the hospital to prioritize, practiced taking slow, determined steps across a physical therapy mat with his own daughter Mia cheering her on from a beanbag chair in the corner, the two girls having become inseparable the way only children who've each known real loss can become. Eleanor stood beside him with 2 cups of coffee, handed him one without a word, and the two of them watched in silence as their daughters, for a few unguarded minutes, simply existed as ordinary happy children instead of a billionaire's fragile heiress and a janitor's motherless girl. Nobody watching that scene would have guessed the distance either family had traveled to arrive at it. If this story touched something in you, if you found yourself blinking back tears somewhere in the middle of it, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today, because these stories only keep reaching people who need them when you help carry them forward. And before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something a little different. Comment the single word "danced" below if you believe that one small act of kindness, offered without any expectation of being seen, can quietly change the entire direction of a life. Because in the end, Daniel Reyes never once mopped that floor hoping anyone important would notice him. He simply chose, night after night, exhausted and grieving and afraid for his own daughter's future, to be gentle with a stranger's child who needed a reason to smile. He never asked for a reward, and he never expected one. But sometimes the world is watching from a doorway you can't see, and sometimes the smallest, quietest kindness you offer a stranger becomes the very thing that finally saves you too.